Homage to the Triple Gem. So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm here at Nikapitiya Aranya, and still have been heading down to look at the potential Kuti site. And very good news, amazingly enough, some of the allergies that I have in the Sri Lankan forest seem to be getting better in this area. So maybe it just takes a little bit of time in this case for the body to adapt. And so recent days have been discussing a lot about the present moment and putting forth effort in the present moment. I have this kind of small Discord channel, which is still not open to, it's not like one that you can search on the server for. You actually have to go and join it and have some kind of interesting discussions there. And there's a kind of a controversy in modern Western Buddhism in that there's a really great attraction that people have to practices or techniques or teachings that point towards effortlessness as a path towards nibbana or as a path towards spiritual development. The West is a really interesting society in that now, having traveled a little bit, I can say that the Western culture is very effort-focused. It's a very hard-working culture, actually. There are different hard-working cultures in the world, and Western culture is one of them. The culture there is hard-working. People spend a lot of time at work, 8 hours at work or more, 8 hours a day at work or more. Actually, 8 hours used to be the standard. I think my suspicion is that the standard is now gradually increasing. Not only that, people spend a huge amount of time getting education from the time they're very young, going up into their 20s. So, and it can be intense. The higher levels of education are intense, difficult to complete, require quite a lot of work, and have high stakes attached to them. And similarly, the work world is like that too. It requires a lot of work and it has high stakes attached to it, although the rewards are also quite high in Western countries. Generally, they're very wealthy, actually. I mean, having been born in Canada, I didn't really appreciate the level of wealth that was there. But these countries are wealthy, generally, not just in terms of GDP, in terms of the services that are available, in terms of the availability of different items, just like things that you might take for granted are just widely available there. Many other parts of the world, they would be available, but not so easy to get. I mean, you can't just take it for granted that you'll necessarily have anything you want to eat at any time, or that you'll just be able to get any basic electronics at any time. So in the Western world, there's this kind of joining together of very hard work and sometimes very intense material rewards, very intense material pleasures. So I think sometimes people in other parts of the world, they look at the way that Western culture is portrayed on TV, and they see, the people going on vacations and driving cars and, having all these things. What's not apparent is the level of work, intense effort, and, almost brinksmanship that's there in like some jobs or some other things, very kind of intense. So because of this is one of the reasons why when we talk about effort, when one talks about effort in the context of Western spiritual development, what it conjures up is this kind of it can conjure up this kind of image of this intense, headlong race, competing against other people one-to-one, and winner takes all, and, cutthroat. And, you can lose everything, you can gain everything. Also, it conjures up these images of working these intense long hours that have fueled stress, and the material things that one is able to get, which actually are significant. I mean, they're quite significant in Western culture. Those things add less and less value the more and more of them one has. I remember speaking to my friend a few years ago. We were kind of joking. I mean, we're all born in the 80s now, kind of now middle-aged, but I remember going through these phases where technology is developed, and it just seems like a new phase or new wave of technology that changes the world is just a normal thing. So I think we were talking about flying cars a few years ago. Kind of went back to visit Canada, and I heard the news. Maybe they're developing flying cars, and he's like, whatever. They should skip that and go straight to teleportation. So he's just kind of joking, but it's whatever. They develop new flying cars. Who cares? I mean, maybe you care. You get to fly to someplace faster or whatever. when you've been through enough of these cycles of technology and like complete world overhaul through these technologies, then actually another world overhaul is, it's not a new thing. It's not something that you necessarily anticipate or have an idea that it's going to be something that makes you extremely happy, because people have been through like 4 or 5 of them already, and their happiness level is not necessarily different. So what you have then, when you have these ideas of putting forth effort, the work and the reward involved, it conjures up this image of intense effort for maybe like some new material pleasures that are not going to be all that satisfying, that are just normal, but one doesn't know a way out of that. So perceptions can come in packages, and the word effort, the word putting forth effort, can conjure up this package deal, this package idea of like working long hours, stress, sometimes intense, ruthless competition, material rewards, which by an objective standard are great, are actually enormous, but by a standard of how much marginal happiness they give a person, how much happiness one on the other they give one, not really all that impressive to somebody who's been living in that society their whole life. So for this reason, this is one of the reasons that these kind of practices, which promote like a broad open awareness, promote like a relaxed awareness, and criticize intense or focused effort, those types of practices can be quite appealing to Western people. Let's not just say Western people raised in cultures with a relatively intense work ethic. And thinking about applying that work ethic to one's spiritual practice can be something that seems like potentially depressing, potentially daunting. So one of the important things to understand in this mix is that a kind of open, broad awareness, or like a relaxed approach to spiritual practice, that can be a valid application of one's meditation practice or one's meditation topic. And a lot depends on how the mind is moving, what's going on with the mind. But one really important thing is that in general, an intense, focused application of effort in terms of staying in the present moment is something that generates happiness. There's a really strange paradox here in that wherever a person wants to seek happiness in samsara, there's always elements of being a producer and being a consumer. It's just that in a person's perception, these elements are not linked together. Actually, happiness, a kind of happiness, sometimes has a connection, a dependency to its opposite. So we can say, like, for example, imagine a person who works really hard all week, and then they have the weekend, the time off. The weekend is really pleasant, really pleasurable. I imagine another person who's retired, they struggle with the fact that they have so much free time on their hands. It can be kind of depressing. So sensual pleasures, in terms of their happiness, they have a dependency on their opposite, actually. They depend on contrast. They depend on lack. So we're hearing about this study where they followed people who'd won the lotto a year after, and followed people who'd been in like a horrendous car crash a year after, and asked them to report on their levels of happiness. And the people who'd been in a horrendous car crash a year after that, they reported higher levels of happiness than people who won the lottery. It's not to say that you'd rather be in a car crash than winning the lottery, but it's a point towards this idea that happiness depends on contrast when one is consuming sensual pleasures. If you were in a car crash a year ago, you could barely walk and you're mangled and you're not able to do much and you're in terrible shape. And now a year later, you can start to do some of those things, but you haven't regained your full abilities. It's still a step up. It's still by way of contrast, and that contrast can give more happiness from the time when you were in the car crash. In contrast, if you've won the lotto a year later on, maybe you've spent a lot of that money and it's now gone. In contrast, you're much worse off. And the marginal benefit you're getting from those happinesses is getting less. So when a person learns to focus their mind in the present moment and put down thoughts of the future, thoughts of the past, essentially what they're doing is it's a gathering together of all the types of the way that the mind would go to seek to feed on happiness in the external world and bringing it together in a single point, which generates a different type of happiness. But these conditions are still there. The necessity to be a producer of the happiness is there, and the consequences of being a consumer are there. So when we think about spiritual practice and we think about the effort, the intense effort required to stay in the present moment throughout the day, which is just a really standard description of how to practice in the canon and is the typical way that meditation was traditionally taught. Like you should learn to be in the present moment, stay in the present moment, don't focus on the past, don't focus on the future, learn to be aware of exactly what it is you're doing. So this requires an intense application of will and intense application of effort because people are used to sending their minds off to the future to build something that's either really good or really bad and back to the past. And it very rarely stays in the present moment. Sometimes it's, if you counted the percentage, it would be relatively low. It might be like, 10% of the time, 5% of the time. Sometimes you can just come into the present moment and start a task and then be on automatic pilot doing the rest of it. And your mind can be off back to the past or the future again. So when we think about applying effort to keep the mind reined in right here, it's something that can again conjure up these images of this work and reward ratio that's not that satisfying because initially that's something that's very, very unpleasant. I mean, you're breaking an addiction. You're breaking a habit of having the mind rush out and think whatever it wants, do whatever it wants, which is also what brings it a lot of pain. So essentially what you're going through is a phase of withdrawal from the future, a phase of withdrawal from the past. There's an addiction to thinking about the future, an addiction to thinking about the past. And like all of these addictions, they come with short-term benefits, long-term consequences. When we're way out there in the future, then we're subject to whatever the mind conjures up about what's going to happen in the future. We're back there in the past, we're subject to whatever the mind conjures up about what the meaning was that whatever was happened in the past, about who we are. Oh, this happened, it was a bad thing. I'm a bad person. I'm not a good person. Or even, I'm a really great person because this happened. And then in the future, that doesn't play out. One's idea of how the world should form around one's personality does not play out. And then one suffers because of that. So when one brings the mind to focus in on the present moment, one is bringing these same causes together. You have both the cause being the producer of happiness, which is to stay in the present moment. And then you also have this aspect of being the consumer, because what tends to happen is the more that one focuses in on the present moment, the more the mind settles down. So I was talking about this a couple of talks back. And the Buddha gives similes for a simile of like a bowl of water when he talks about the removal of hindrances from the mind. And we can imagine a bowl of water that has all kinds of stuff in it. It's just all stirred up with, all kinds of sand, whatever it might be, in it. Say one takes a stick and stirs it up so it's just spinning all over the place. When one stops that spinning, then these things settle. And as they settle, the water becomes calm. You can clearly see what's in there, what's in the bowl. It's easier to remove the stuff that's bad. It's easier to, keep whatever you wanted to keep there in the bowl because you can see clearly what's there. So when the mind focuses on the present moment, there's many things that are hidden in the agitation of the mind that sends it out to when it's sent out to the future and when it goes back to the past. And this sending out to the future and back to the past is itself an agitation. It can be an agitation. It's a less pleasant state than being in the present moment. So like any addiction, it becomes hard to imagine life without that addiction. I mean, I remember, I think I've said this in previous videos, kind of used to be addicted to marijuana. And if you have an addiction, you just can't picture going anywhere without that and it being pleasant. I remember being a young man and it was like, to go to a movie, I had to smoke marijuana before. And if I didn't, it was like a waste of time going to the movie. so it's going to be, oh yeah, we didn't smoke before. It's like, you just can't imagine life without this particular addiction. But life without it is much more pleasant. So when one learns to focus on the present moment and break this addiction, one is removing the agitation that's inherent with having a mind that's subject to the vagaries of the future, the vagaries of the past, and the mind starts to settle down, and one paradoxically experiences more happiness, more peace, and more energy. And sometimes the body can even heal more in ways that one wouldn't expect, just from this devotion to staying in the present moment. Now, one of the complaints about this is that this can be seen as like some kind of like compartmentalized skill, where it's like you stay in the present moment, you blot everything else out, and maybe you can get some states of peace, but you could do that being an immoral person, being an evil person, whatever these kind of things, negative things you could do, you just blot it out. But when you try to stay in the present moment, if you have remorse because you're doing evil things about the past, it doesn't work out well. Or if you have a lot of agitation about the future, say you want wealth, you want property, you want fame, you want people to love you, you want to be recognized as somebody who's really popular, really important in your life, it's going to be much more difficult to keep in the present moment and to feel at ease in the present moment, to have a sense of ease arising in the present moment strictly because of your focusing there. I mean, it's a really strange paradox. You wouldn't think that focusing can make you happy, that putting forth effort can make you happy. But the more that one can develop this skill, the more that one could potentially generate happiness at will, just through the act of focusing. But there is a cost to it. I mean, you can't be an immoral person doing this, or if you are, then it's going to be pretty hit and miss, a person's ability to stay in the present moment, a person's ability to focus their mind. You have to let go of the desire for gains, offerings, and fame. You have to let go of that more and more. The more stable that a person wants their mind to become in the present moment. So, I mean, I brought up this example. It's known mainly among monks, but not widely among lay people. There's a monk in the modern era who was formerly really good at jhanas. He was really excellent at them, and he became kind of swept away by what we call labha sankhara siloko, gains, offerings, and fame. And he did this thing, this thing that was relatively serious, and he lost his ability to enter jhanas after that, apparently. He could no longer enter them. So monks who have psychic power say he lost, one of the monks who have psychic, he lost his jhanas. He can't do them anymore. Although they might still go around teaching that, have had the experience in the past, but no longer can practically do them. So the negative qualities that are there in the mind are an obstacle to a person learning to focus and put forth effort in the present moment. And they have to be let go of. The Buddha, to develop this skill further in a way that's truly beneficial. So this skill is tied together with purification of the mind. And regarding what we're talking about at the beginning of the talk, paradoxically, it's a type of effort that generates more peace. And the more that one does it, the more it can generate peace immediately. The more that the baseline for one's life can become peace. It's almost like they use this word practice momentum as you try to stay in the present more and more throughout the day and let go of the obstacles to that, the immorality that a person might have and the desire for the future, which oftentimes for humans basically is including some aspect of gains, offerings, and fame. How you're going to be popular in the future, famous in the future, how you're going to have wealth or whatever kinds of sensual pleasures in the future, especially how people are going to react to you. There's this huge degree to which a person's world in the human realm is built by the perceptions that other people have of them and the way that other people treat them. It's huge. Humans are social creatures. So, it's just everything is, almost all the sensual pleasures that a person might have get influenced by that to one degree or another. The difference between a Mercedes-Benz and a Toyota in Canada or the United States, say, is not that great in terms of what you're doing in the car, what you're doing driving around. One might have these kind of like fuzzy plastics, we call it like fuzzy, polyester seat covers, and others got leather. They might have some, random new features or whatever, but it's not a huge difference, honestly, being in one car versus the other. The difference is in the way that people treat you. So, this is a huge aspect of the human experience. So learning to come back to the present moment and let go of that addiction to gains, offerings, and fame, the way that people treat you, and just focus in on the present moment in and of itself. This is something that can build momentum throughout the day so that one gets this kind of like momentum of peacefulness going. A momentum that builds the more that one puts the inputs in. Input. And that momentum builds. And even if one stops doing for a time, that momentum continues onward so that whatever it is that one is doing can seem more peaceful, can seem more easeful. The hindrances that were there that, say, used to be present when one tried to direct the mind towards a purposeful activity and got swept away by an addiction, got swept away by a worry, got waylaid by whatever, and the mind would not do what it was supposed to do, those things can fall away, and one finds that one can direct one's mind towards tasks more easily. But the really important part of this is right there in the present. the happiness that one gets is real. It's a higher type of happiness that one can get from this practice than from whatever kind of sensual pleasures one gets, from whatever praise people might give one, from whatever, tasty food one might eat. And it's right there to be had. The thing about it is that the aspect of both the producer and the consumer are there. I mean, this effort that you have to put forth constantly, that's the production side. The happiness that comes, that's the consumption side. But if a person goes out to consume it, it falls away. So the principles that exist in samsara are there in basically every type of happiness that one will generate. I mean, this includes the type of happiness that comes from staying in the present moment. But this intense, focused effort doesn't have the same kind of work and payback mechanisms that one is used to from, say, like slogging it out in the world, being in intense competition with people. Sometimes now, in the West, in like business and other things, even in politics, it can become a case where it's like being corrupt, being backstabbing, that's what gets you ahead. And so people can associate efforts with these things, effort in meditation towards these things. But the effort to stay in the present moment, generate this type of happiness, is hampered by all of these evil activities. So really, it's an effort that's apart from these things, that's tied to the purification of the mind, that generates happiness. And one of its most important aspects is it can be very clear to see this dichotomy between the need to produce and the need to consume, which is there throughout samsara. And these things spin around each other all the time. And wherever a person looks for a produced happiness, the conditions that lead to its falling away are there. And one can see when one generates these types of happiness that the desire is to go and just chill out in it. And, one has this kind of practice momentum, doing things seems very easy, seems very lighthearted. You can just go and do stuff for a while and feel happy doing that, but your happiness will fall away. And this is a kind of cycle that exists throughout samsara. People become really wealthy, they become conceited, complacent. They become really successful, becomes conceited, complacent, it falls away. Gain and loss spin around on each other. Pleasure and pain spin around on each other. And all these principles can be seen clearly when you gather the mind right here. So this type of effort, this type of focused effort to be in the present moment, is not something to be afraid of. It is something that's recommended in the canon. It is something that's recommended in standard meditation techniques. And it is something that generates a happiness that makes it worthwhile to do. It's seen as a pleasant abiding even for arahants. So this is a pleasant way to live one's life, to let go of negative qualities stemming from immorality, to let go of the desire for gains, offerings, and fame, and to learn to be at ease being alone, just being in the present moment, just doing walking and sitting, and having food, a roof, the minimum things, is enough to generate all the happiness that one needs. But this type of happiness, it's also conditioned, and so it's subject to falling away. So the more that one wants a stable type of happiness, the more that one has to investigate to see what one's addictions are to basically anything that's conditioned at all. And this is how this ties into the Buddhist path as a whole, a path which is built on conditioned things, but that leads to an unconditioned goal. So the Buddha says, don't be afraid of the pleasure of merit. He recommends the pleasure of jhana. And we also shouldn't be afraid of the effort that goes into developing these things, the effort to stay focused in the present moment, because this brings ease. When we start to break the addiction, it brings ease. When we develop the skill, it brings ease. And when we get the results, it brings ease. It's something that's good. It's something that's tied to wholesome qualities. It's something that's part of the path. And it's something that's worth cultivating.